Things from the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky in television. I'm Allison Lips. Steve Newvine is back. Steve is the author of Jack and Johnny, Benny, Carson, and A Friendship Made for Television. This time we're discussing Susan Morrison's book, Lorne, the Man Who Invented Saturday Night Live. I was promoting this discussion of Lorne way before we actually put this on the calendar, so I'm excited that anyone who has been following GFib, we have finally gotten to the book. So thank you, Steve, for joining me for this.
Thank you. I'm honored to be part of this discussion today.
And I read this book a few months ago. It was not a quick read for me, which surprised me, but I did get through it. What were your initial thoughts on the book?
My I had the same challenge. You know, it's thicker than what I normally read,
Yeah, it's
and
600 pages.
I'm surprised how many books I read simply because they're thin enough. I figure I can get through it in a week or two. But
Yes.
this one did take me about a month with the kind of reading that I do. And I made a comment to some folks that much like the series, I thought the first half kind of dragged and
Yeah.
then kind of picked up midstream. And, uh, and I say that because I mean I was a big fan of the show and those early years, but I thought it did take a while for the show to kind of find its stride. And I thought that that was my initial reaction, was the first part was kind of slow, but I really got a lot
Yes.
out of the second half, and just more about Lorne, which is what was the real topic of the book. Wasn't so much about the show, but his creative force behind it. And so I enjoyed that from that perspective,
Yeah.
and I like the device of taking you through a typical week of putting on Saturday Night Live, what they do on Monday, and what they do on
Yeah.
Tuesday, and I thought that was an interesting device, and to try to align that with Lauren's career and what it was like in those early formative years, and as he matured through his life and his career.
I thought it was an interesting device. It didn't work for me very well. I much prefer things to be in a chronological order. If you're using that type of device where it's like Monday, this is what they do.
Yeah.
It and then you're going about like Lorne Lipowitz was born on, and Lipowitz is Lorne Michael's birth last name. He ended up changing it with the help of Hart Pomerantz once they both started having a career in comedy. So that was interesting to hear about Lorne and Hart, which I was not familiar with.
Mhm.
Um, I know Lorne Michaels as the producer of Saturday Night Live. I didn't realize that he had ever done writing for himself, and in the book, or I not for him. Well, yeah, for himself. I didn't know about Lorne and Hart's Terrific Hour, or that he met with Woody Allen and tried to sell Woody Allen material. I knew about Laugh-In. I wasn't 100% sure what his role in Laugh-In was, but I knew that was Laugh-In Saturday Night Live. I knew that connection.
Right. And Laugh-In plays a big role not only in his development as a writer, but also kind of his development as a producer by
Yes.
seeing what he would not want to do. The idea that the writers were in a hotel room, a few miles away
Yeah.
from the studio, and that they were not as engaged with the production as certainly the writers of Saturday Night Live are. And I thought the early stuff was good too. The connection with the Canadian comedy team that was always on the Ed
Plain and
Sullivan.
Schuster.
Yes, and that was interesting. And some of the stuff I've learned over the years and picked up, but yeah, that development, and I don't know if you've ever been to Toronto. When I lived in
I
upstate New
haven't.
York, that was a weekend drive. We could go, and it was at a time when crossing the border was not a big deal. And and it's a beautiful city. And to think that that was where, okay, that's where some of this stuff really started to
Yes.
germinate. And the idea that as good as he could be in Canada, New York, that's where the Empire State Building is. That's where King Kong is. You want to be King Kong, you go to where the Empire
Yes.
Building is. And so
Yeah.
the pull that and of course by way of Hollywood and all of that. So yeah, I'm always leery of those early chapters in biographies and autobiographies, when the person really who cares
Mhm.
what you're more interested in their career. But if the author can kind of tie that to the development of the person,
Right.
um, it works. And I thought it worked in this case.
Susan Morrison made a lot out of the fact that Lauren's father died when he was in his early teens, and how that distance is sort of how he, like, affects how he interacts with the Saturday Night Live crew and staff members, which I'm not sure if that's necessarily an accurate or fair, interpretation of those relationships. But I did find when people are talking about their relationship with Lauren, to me, there's like a weird Stockholm syndrome thing going on with how, yeah, it was rough and the long days and the nights, but it was all worth it and we love Lauren.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't quite understand those feelings with, because Conan O'Brien said it, Amy Poehler said it, John Mulaney said it. There's a huge list of Saturday Night Live cast members who went on to become huge stars. Well, John Mulaney, I think, was a writer at the time, not a cast member, but they went on to be huge stars who they're like, "We owe it all to Lorne," but there were a lot of times when we did not like him.
That's I think that's a common when you have a strong parent figure in a household as well. It's a parent, you love them,
Yeah.
and yet they can drive you nuts
Yeah.
if circumstances are such. But uh, in my household, I would say my father was more the dominant personality. Now he's 91 years old, and
Yeah.
that relationship has changed. But I certainly always wanted to please him, make him proud of me, and I
Yes.
think how some of these cast members view it is that he was their father, and
Yeah.
but at the end of the string, they realized that he was the one that made it happen for them and gave them the break. And you always most entertainers and people in any profession, you always have a little affection for that person that gave you the big break. And I know that I've had several bosses over the years. I've always thanked them. In one of my books, I actually listed all of my bosses by first name and thanked them for hiring me, because they're the ones who had the faith that maybe you were the right one for that particular job. And that's certainly how I think the cast and the writers and anybody associated with that show who was hired by Lauren might feel. And at the same time, can make once they've left the nest, can
Mhm.
take a the boss in terms of some of the characters. I know they talk about some of the characters in the movies being patterned after Lauren, or
Right,
some.
Doctor Evil or everyone who ever worked for SNL has a Lorne impression.
Right, right.
Um, I'm not going to do it because I'm mixing a few of the words that people use to get into it. I think one of them is like, "Alright, alright, alright," but I'm also sort of like, that might also be Matthew McConaughey, so I don't know what's going on in my head right now.
Well, one of the comments, well, I've finished the book. I did a little post on the Jack Benny International Jack Benny Fan Club site. I got
Mhm,
lots of responses, and that's a very active group, because of the quote on the back. Basically,
mhm.
Paul McCartney saying he always reminded me of Jack Benny, but one of
Oh,
those
right, yes. It's right
reactions
there.
right there at the bottom there above the UPC code. um,
Yes.
The one of the comments given to me was that in many ways, Lorne was Jack, in the sense that he was the boss, but everybody that worked with him made fun of him, and if you think of some of those
Yes.
radio shows, yeah, Jack was the boss. His name was on the check, but the whole show was built around taking stabs and jabs at him throughout, and at the end of the day, it was the Jack Benny show, so it didn't matter if you got the laughs.
Right. And they're both incredibly generous people. With Lorne, we hear a lot of people talk about his presence when they either join the cast or when it's Christmas time, his long list, and they get
Yeah,
very nice presents, and he feels it's his responsibility when people first break into the industry to show them how to live the good life. He likes nice things, whether that's going to those fancy restaurants in New York. I don't remember which one they kept.
I forget
Ne
the name. I do remember the passages though about how he would go and
Yeah.
his assistant would
You're breaking up.
bed, so he arrived, the meal could be. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm hope I'm can you hear me all right now? I may have been kicking a
Yeah.
wire there. Real.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
just that he would go to a restaurant and the assistant would call ahead so that when he arrived, the meal was presented to him.
Yes.
As another example, as you described, of how he liked nice things and he liked to be treated well and tried to treat the people that had made it to the club. uh,
Yes.
so I found that fast, and that's I guess what I enjoyed most about the book was just that insight as to what it was like to be, what it is like to be Lorne Michaels, and what a, and
Yes.
I love that passage about arriving at 30 Rock and riding the elevator up to the sixth floor to just kind of check in on Jimmy Fallon, and like, okay, look over the monologue, see, make sure
Mhm.
Jimmy's, and then back on the elevator further up, just checking on his empire that he's
Yes.
built. And in many respects, if you had that job, you would never want to leave it. And that's why he's still in place.
Right, there was the period of 5 years that he had left. The show kind of fell apart, and then NBC's like, "Please come back." It also helps that his film career was going nowhere.
Right. It's interesting, because I remember I had just started working as a professional out of college, and in 80, 79 and 80. Um, and then I moved to a station in Huntsville, Alabama. I was a television
Yeah.
reporter before. And we would be doing our late newscast. And so it was the central time zone. It was over at 10:30 at night. And we'd go upstairs. It was on Saturday night, and
Mhm.
we'd have it on. And we were all of that. We were formed by Saturday Night Live. I mean, the original Saturday Night Live, and we found it very hard to laugh at some of what we were watching. And after maybe 20 minutes, we would just leave, because it was on in the newsroom, but we wanted to get on and get out of the way. And
Yeah.
and yeah, if it wasn't for Eddie Murphy, I think we probably would have just just kind of like, okay, there was just that ray of hope, and then of course Joe Piscopo, and it just we stayed with it, and I actually at that point probably did drift away, and uh, as a young married father, it was more taping it and watching the good parts the next day, kind of watching it
Yeah,
through.
and now it's watch the good parts online.
Yeah. Now you're right, exactly. It's about all we watch now, if we watch it at all. The show's certainly changed, but I also acknowledge we've changed, or I've changed, that's for sure. And I remember looking forward to the Steve Martin Short hosted edition a couple of
Mhm.
years ago. This will be great, and so I recorded the whole thing, And as I'm watching, I'm like, where are the live sketches? It was like it was like monologue and then all these recorded pieces. And I
Yeah.
guess that become the norm on this show. I mean, they still do a lot of sketches, but there was just this long period of canned pieces and like wow this. But I acknowledge I'm not the audience they're after anymore. I'm the good old days. I'm the guy that complained about the Jack Parr viewers back when Carson was so dominant.
So going back to like it's not really like you're not in the target audience anymore. How do you feel about the whole I mean, it's kind of what everyone says, like SNL was funniest when you were in high school.
Yes, in my case, in junior college, but because
Yeah.
but you're right. It was, and yeah, you just have such good memories from that period of time. In fact, I was thinking about that era in the past week with Brian Wilson passing, and just some
Mhm.
great associated with a late winter day where it was warmer than normal. So at college, some of the dorms had the windows open, speakers in the windows, and you knew winter was still hanging on, but and this music was coming out, and I'm sure it was the Beach Boys. I can't say with great accuracy it was, but you just had that view of this was just what reminded me so much of growing up and
So
going to college.
if it wasn't the Beach Boys, it was a Beach Boys vibe.
That kind of vibe, right? The summer was just about here, and you can reach out and grab it, and that's how we felt about Saturday Night Live. Whenever we were
Mhm.
in college, it was cool. It was the greatest thing. I
Yeah.
remember some Saturday nights at Syracuse University, we wouldn't go out until after Saturday Night Live. You'd go and watch the show, and that was during that period of time when CBS had the Mary Tyler Moore, followed by Bob Newhart, followed by Carol Burnett, and you had a half-hour break to get ready for Saturday Night
Yeah.
Live. Just a wonderful period of time. But that's how we remember that era, which wherever you were at that point in your life, and if Saturday Night Live was part of that, then that's the one you remember. And
Yeah.
I love too, and they did this in the anniversary show as well, just kind of make fun of the fact that people are always criticizing the show the way it is now. It was always better 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Whenever
Right.
we were that particular age where it influenced us so much, that was when it was best. And to
Right.
be on years, and just think of how many generations have been touched by it.
Right, because you were talking about when you were in college, and when I was in college, that was the time and high school, that was the time when The Lonely Island were the breakout stars of Saturday Night Live,
Mhm.
which digital shorts would not have existed in the 70s or the 80s because there was no internet. And musical comedy on the early years of Saturday Night Live looked very different than it was when like, The Lonely Island had, Lazy Sunday, they had, Sex on a Boat, there was, Dick in a Box, which is the one that everyone keeps referencing if you're gonna go with Lazy Island. Like, which another thing, like, that would not have gone on the air earlier than the time period.
George Carlin used to talk about when he was
Yeah.
a comedy writer,
Yeah.
and how he and his fellow comedy writers would write some really raunchy stuff, knowing the network would
Mhm.
take it out, but doing that so they could protect the stuff they really wanted to get in. If they had turned in a script with just the stuff they wanted to get in, some
When
of that was just the idea that you always had to kind of push it. And depending on how thorough or how inquisitive the censor was, you got away with a lot of stuff. And they certainly got away with a lot of stuff. I mean, just some of those
Yeah.
Don sponsor billboards for Weekend Update or like in the late 70s, and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
they're actually saying that. on TV, but they could get away with it, and it's
Right,
interesting in many respects. Yeah, a lot of it may have gone too overboard now, but then every now and then you're like you say, well, you see a repeat or a clip from that era, and you go, well, that wouldn't fly today. So
right.
just
Every era has its own standards, and some of those age fine, some of those don't age very well. It's all context of the time. And was there any part in the book that stood out to you? Because there was so much, like Tina Fey, um, Kids in the Hall,
well,
like all the spin-offs.
oh yeah, yeah. In fact, those are two of the things that I made some notes about, knowing we were going to have this conversation. But I did not know, and I'm still not sure it's accurate, but I can't prove otherwise, that Kids in the Hall got its name from a reference that Benny would make on the radio
Yes.
show. He would do a joke that the writers wanted and didn't go over well, and so Benny would make a comment to the effect of, "Well,
Yes.
it's that was funny." I never heard that, but I don't question that it happened, and that's the way it was. But the spin-offs I found interesting too. Is this the comment somebody made it that Lauren deserved a bigger um, piece of the credit for some of the TV series that were in effect spin-offs of Saturday Night Live sketches. And, they use as the example Third Rock from the Sun being in effect a spin-off of Wayne's World, and the
Third Rock from the
the '70s
Sun?
show. '70s show would be the yeah Coneheads for
Okay.
the Coneheads was basically Third Rock from the Sun. If it hit, if it
Got
was
it.
the
That's what I thought you were getting at, and they both have Jane Curtin in them, but I wanted to make sure we were on the same page.
spoke there initially, and then the Wayne's World being the '70s show, and you think about that, I think that's right. That you could see where that
Yeah,
influence, and I'm surprised that the movies, with some exceptions, the movies were certainly inspired by Lauren's presence on the show, and these performers when they were part of that. I'm just surprised it's just not as big a part of our movie heritage as you would think, given the kind of launch it had with a national television show behind it and everything. And they're out there. They're just part of the mix right now.
right. I think the only Saturday Night Live spin-off movie that I would say continues to be culturally relevant is Wayne's World. Like that's one of those, if that's the type of movie you're into, you have to see that. And then it's not a Saturday Night Live movie, but Animal House,
Yes.
which was uh, John Belushi, and Morrison goes into the role Saturday Night Live played in that, and it's like, should Lauren have done something before that movie? And then that movie also impacted how many episodes of that season Belushi could be on.
Right. Right. Um, I remember 1978 going to the movies with a bunch of my roommates, from our dorm at Syracuse University,
Mhm.
to see Animal House, and just I just remember it had such an impact on us, and just for that entire experience, for at least that year anyway, it was like, wow, this was just an incredible movie, and and Belushi was just amazing. And I there's another little movie that Belushi did that I really enjoyed, but you don't see it anymore. It's called Continental Divide. It was a romantic
Sure.
comedy. Blair Brown, and I thought he was really good. He played a newspaper columnist in that, and but it's just it's a sad story when we talk about Belushi because of
Yeah.
his life ended and how his life was, and that's probably one of the sadder parts of this whole legacy of Lorne Michaels is that you do have these of course you think about Belushi and how, and, and what role, if any, did Lorne play by simply allowing some of the drug abuse and usage continue on the show, or
He did get better with not allowing it and
yeah.
did eventually start staging interventions. I think it was the 70s. Drugs were much more openly used, and there are several situations where Morrison talks about Lorne using cocaine and LSD with whoever he's with, and what I found very odd is that even when he's under the influence of drugs that would make most people, like, very high or hallucinate, people around Lorne are just like, "Yeah, he's still Lorne." Like, not much happens.
Yes, I would agree with that from what at least some of these scenarios that the book shows and discusses. Yeah, it was certainly an influence in some ways, and the fact that you could get through that to the other side and still function and manage. I was interested too in just the whole battles with the network kind of stuff, starting from, meeting with Carson at the very beginning to kind of get his blessing slash, you know,
Yeah,
you guys worry about your thing and I'll keep doing my thing. Um, and
right.
through fights with the censors, and then just the idea where um, he he always recognized and he stressed to Conan, it's important to stay on the air. You can't just, fall on your sword because you believe so strongly in
Right.
whatever that you've got to, once you lose that forum, you have nothing. You have no power base at all.
That also
And
got Conan off the Christmas list.
yeah, yeah. And you
But
know,
Conan's doing just fine.
yeah, I just actually started sampling Conan's radio efforts during we had a week of Sirius radio that was coming through my car, so I was like listening to it, like, yeah, yeah, he's done fine for himself.
Oh,
But
yeah.
you wonder, had he sort of, I don't know what kind of conversations they had, but I believe it's in the book where Lauren kind of implored on him to stick with this Tonight Show. Let's get through this current, you know, you know, conflagration of Leno's 10 o'clock show and then coming back to the Tonight Show, and let's just kind of get through that. Stay on the air and trust, kind of trust me from Lauren's perspective. Trust me, and we'll take care of this. And then
Part
Conan doing that, and you know,
part
we.
of the issue is that Lorne was not involved in the Conan O'Brien Tonight Show.
Mhm.
He was not
Right.
a producer on it. Conan had kind of flown out of the nest, whereas now Jimmy Fallon is still very much still part of Lorne's empire. Conan was not at that point, which I think also played a role. Conan also, whether or not he will admit it, came across as a little bit of a martyr at the time, which also bothered Lorne, and Lorne stated as much publicly at the time. And as much as I love Conan, I felt that was a little weird.
Yeah.
Also, I think this is where Lorne's calculations went wrong because Lorne could not have foreseen the power of Twitter. That year where Conan couldn't have gone on television, he had Twitter and he went on a live show, the live tour. Had that not existed, I think we would have been looking at a very different situation with Conan in his career.
Interesting. Yeah, I think. we probably would have seen just would have just been a footnote,
Right.
which it's funny to see, and they have it in 30 Rock. I know there's this display of a portrait display of the hosts of the Tonight Show, and there's Conan. It's like, well, yeah, I guess he was, but it was so short. I remember when all this kind of started, and I was talking to a friend about this. We said, it seems like some of those sketches go on long. Some of those taped pieces just go on longer than, and they used to be that way on the Late Show with Conan O'Brien, but it
Yeah,
just
late night.
and but it just seemed like that, there, and this friend of mine was giving me an example of a piece he watched, and he said he was watching it for like 2 minutes. And so this really isn't going anywhere. And I'll switch around and see what else is going on. And he said, I
Yeah.
must have been going around the horn for at least another 2 or 3 minutes. I come back and they're still doing this bit, that's on tape. And and I guess I understood too at the time that Conan was somewhat reluctant to take notes from the network about, maybe the network even said, some of these sketches are running a little long, and they kind of in effect way. So I mean, it was not a perfect show
No, it
anyway,
wasn't,
but it had all this other stuff working against.
and
Yeah.
also Conan at the beginning, I don't think you could really lean into this because people don't know what to expect, but definitely towards the end, it's sort of like, "We're gonna go on too long because it's gonna be funny, unfunny, and then it's gonna circle right back to funny," and that's kind of what they did. Whether or not that works for you is another story, but that was always part of Conan's humor where it's like, "Okay, you've been doing this for 3 minutes. Can we move on?" And then it's like 5 minutes later, and now you're back to rolling on the floor.
Yeah, I probably did experience some of that as a viewer of Late Night with Conan O'Brien,
Yeah.
and I just remember, I think I mentioned this on your other broadcasts or podcasts.
Mhm.
Um, I used to go to New York when I lived in upstate New York. A friend of mine and he was in Philly, I was in Rochester, and we would drive, and he'd take the train in. We'd meet in New York, Midtown at noontime, have lunch, do a poor man's tour of New York, looking
Yeah.
at Coda and different sites and things like that, Monk's Diner, um, and then we'd go to either Conan or David Letterman, depending on tickets we were able to get. And so
Yeah.
I was see Conan on 2 or 3 occasions, and what I would consider the best of Conan when the show was, really, clicking along. And I do remember a sketch they did with a guy in the audience and his arm is growing. I kind of forget what the premise was, but every time they cut to this guy in the audience, the arm was longer and it was going out the hallway and all. And we
Yeah.
were behind that. We weren't seen on the air, but it just it was a pretty funny bit, and it probably did go long by most traditional standards, but it was funny, and we were part of that, and uh, so it was good. But there's certainly that influence of with Lauren and the idea that you know sometimes a sketch on Saturday Night Live didn't necessarily end with a dynamite closing punchline. It just kind of ended because you know the guy walked out the door and just, that was it. And
I think
and
that came from Monty Python.
probably yeah, that's certainly that influence was throughout that, especially in those shows in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit of Monty Python, a little bit of Laughing, and I'm sure there's something else that I'm not thinking of in Saturday Night Live.
Noted before we started, I wrote down Phyllis Diller, and I thought, there's an
Okay.
example of writing for Phyllis Diller and writing for someone who really appreciated you know funny stuff and who
Mhm.
treated writers with certainly more respect than he got from the Laugh-In experience.
Yeah.
And just how funny Phyllis Diller was, and she would have them have the writers at her house for dinner, and just she and I remember that show. Never really watched it because I would have been a kid at that time, and we probably went to bed after Bonanza or something.
Yeah.
But the there that was and to think he had a part of that, and just he again could see that the value of that collaboration with other writers, working for a woman, and trying to do women's humor. Now we know with Phyllis it was kind of a different animal because it was
Yeah.
her whole was it was different from what we might see, something Tina
Right,
Fey might
it's the
have.
bad
But
wigs, her husband, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, just yeah, the she had quite a it was quite a persona there, and but
Mm,
I know when she passed a few years ago, she was lauded in a lot of comedy circles for just the contributions she made, not only to her commitment to her character and all that, but just how she appreciated and took care of her writers, and she knew that how important they were, and
yes.
so she was quite something to think that his there's a career that touched that end of the spectrum in comedy and all these other things we've been talking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you really dive into Lorne's life, he is the main connection between the old and the new in terms of he wrote for Laugh-In, which is the 70s, so we're not getting back to the 50s, but the 60s, the 70s, and then 50 years Saturday Night Live,
Mhm.
and he's basically the gatekeeper of comedy right now and has been for a while. There are non Saturday Night Live comedians and comic actors who have made it, but Saturday Night Live, its arms reach pretty far out.
In I'm just thinking sort of like how a lot of the stand-up comedians would refer to Johnny Carson as
Yes.
the pinnacle. That's where you want to be. You want to be on Carson's show on a night that he was hosting, and if you were really really special, you'd get the wave over to the couch and get a couple minutes to talk with him, and of course that's gone and never really been replaced. I know Letterman tried to have some kind of weekly kind of new comedian, but it just never really had any legs and didn't
No, we
last for.
usually got the 550th appearance by Tom Dreesen. Okay.
Yes, Tom, and but you're right about that is really Lauren's. He has that level of reverence that I would think some of the comedians from an earlier era would have for Johnny, and that he's the one that he could make careers, and
Mhm.
he did. He made a lot of people will owe their success to him and his faith that he had in him, and um, yeah, and just I got a kick too out of just like what's going on during the dress rehearsal with Lauren sitting under the bleachers and
Yes, his cubbyhole.
and the assistants, the Lornettes coming through and taking care of whatever he needed and making the changes and if you've been in, I remember being in plays in high school and college, mainly college. I did a couple small things in high school with musical plays, but in college I did more of that. And I just remember the director, and we would do these musical reviews, which I look back, they were like the Lawrence Welk show. We would just have a
Okay.
theme, with several old songs based on that theme. And I remember our it was a professor, a music professor who was, this is his thing to produce these things, and he would just say, "We're gonna cut that. We're gonna cut that whole number," and I was one of them that got cut. Like it was like, gee, we've been working on this for weeks, and but
Mhm.
we saw it in one of our later rehearsals as we were getting close to putting it on, and it's like, no, we're going to cut that, and okay, and we move on because and he could sense that this wasn't working, and
Yeah.
it was college now, so it wasn't like you were offending a bunch of parents by cutting
Right.
their. No, you were adults now. You could they could do that, and
Yeah.
I remember at that time I was kind of relieved because I didn't think I was doing that great a job in that particular song that we were doing, but it had enough other pieces in the show to keep me going. And that's kind of the you think of there's Lorne deciding at after that 8:30 run through, or was it 8 o'clock or 8:30 they started the rehearsal, I forget, or
I don't
the
remember. It probably was 8.
yeah, 8 done by 9:30, 10 o'clock, making
'Cause
that
they also went over by a half hour so that they
right.
could make those cuts and it not damage the show's runtime too
Right.
severely.
And that gets into the whole issue of the area of the amount of material that was created starting on Monday of that week and then going through the week as it's being tossed aside, moved to another show, whatever, all this material, and what, maybe 20% of it actually made it to the air that week, and then we started all over again, and
Right,
gives you
and
a great deal of
I'm sorry you
it,
broke up.
so, it just gave me a even greater respect for what some of the pioneers like Sid Caesar. What
Yes.
I'm sure they didn't throw out as much material as Lauren and his crew, but to think that you had to put that show on every week, and you needed the stuff, and you needed it to work because if it didn't work, they're not gonna have many chances to fail, and so that just created tremendous um, pressure. But having worked in television news for so
Mhm.
many, where we put on a newscast all the time, and you just had to have that capacity to say, okay, we had a bunch of mistakes in this first half hour newscast. The next one's coming up in
Right.
3 hours or whenever. You just put that aside and you move on to the next thing. And I always use that as an example of my ability to work well under pressure, because every day in a newsroom, it was full of that kind of, last minute thing. Something happened half an
Yeah.
hour before we had to scramble and do it. And to do that in a sense of putting on a live television show, it was a newscast, but it was the same kind of discipline that you were going to be on whether or not you were ready or not. And for
Yes.
Lauren to just maintain that, and just to keep it going, and it's I'm sure it's a different feel right now given his age and his he's got lieutenants now that can do some of that heavy lifting.
Right, Steve Higgins. They will also mention I'm not sure if it was the book or the SNL 50 stuff because it all came out around the same time and it blends together, but he comes in around 11, Lorne, and people have to kind of work on his timeline, which he's a night person.
Yeah.
So and then there's also, like, the overnights because rather than creating material all year long or having a longer season, it's everything is made that week. They may carry over a sketch, but it's not a sketch where, like that I didn't get the sense that that was the norm. It's like, "Okay, it's not this week, like, fix it and it may come back," but
Mhm.
Like, if we don't do it this week, the prop's getting thrown out if
Right,
it made it to dress rehearsal.
right. And because it's television too, that they mentioned the props, the sets have to be built, so you have,
Mhm,
get started, even if a decision over whether or not it's going to air
mhm.
is made yet, you need to be ready for that, and the real understanding of how that all kind of comes together. I remember Carson defending the move to Los Angeles from New York
Okay.
way back, and saying, well, one of the issues we had in New York was that it there was always this lag time between we wanted to do something, say a sketch that required a certain, gadget or some kind of a set to be built, and it would take a couple of days to get it ready, and by then it might not be as funny anymore. It was what was
Right.
funny. They can't be funny on Wednesday anymore. And so one of the things he was assured with going to LA was that the departments that were responsible for that kind of thing could turn something around that day. And that was back in the glory years of the West
Yeah.
Alameda studios, where everything was there in that same campus and things could be built and put together more quickly. And so it was, one of the things that took Carson, a lot of factors
Yeah.
why Carson to LA, but that was one of the things he cited at the time, that was always an issue for them in putting together uh, the logistics of putting on a comedy show.
Right.
But generally, I was happy with the how I think I got a new appreciation for the man and what his true legacy will be, because there will be a point where he's no longer going to be behind this show, and maybe it comes a point when the show doesn't exist anymore, and it could be, happens at the same time. Like when he goes, will there be a Saturday Night Live anymore, or will
I
there be?
I don't think so. I think with Saturday Night Live, we're at the point that we are with late night television in general. And Seth Meyers and Jimmy Kimmel have both talked about how once they're done, they don't think that there's going to be someone behind them taking over their spot. Obviously, it wouldn't be called Jimmy Kimmel Live, but it would still be called Late Night if someone came after Seth
Mhm.
Meyers. Just because everything has changed since those shows were at the height of their popularity. Saturday Night Live is still being watched, but a lot of people, especially those younger than me, are getting their comedy sketches online. So there are influencers who are more famous in certain circles than like Amy Sherman, who's one of those breakout Saturday Night Live cast members. Where give her like maybe 3 more years, and she'll be the next one. Where it's like, what's she doing next?
Mhm.
So I think that Lorne is the one who makes Saturday Night Live. He is the tastemaker. Once he goes, maybe Steve Higgins can pull it off for a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be a long-term solution. Like we're talking about the Tonight Show hitting 70 years, the Today Show's over 75. I don't think we're going to be talking about, with the exception of the Today Show, because people like their morning news, I don't think we're going to be talking about these extremely long runs for late night television in 20 years. I mean, it's possible Jimmy Fallon will stick around. I don't see Jimmy Fallon doing much else other than The Tonight Show and various spin offs of Tonight Show sketches. But once he's gone, I think that institution is done because parts of that have been moved to podcasts, and the elements that make up late night have been splintered into their own categories. So if I want sketch comedy, I'm watching sketch comedy. If I want music performances, I'm gonna seek out my favorite band, or I'm just gonna be like, Spotify, tell me what I'm going to like, which isn't always right because you may like something outside of your comfort zone, but it'll give you something you're more likely to enjoy rather than whatever new band Saturday Night Live who- or Jimmy Kimmel or whoever is having on, which because that's not, no longer how we discover music.
It's I've seen it evolve from,
Yeah.
one of my first jobs out of high school was an afternoon disc jockey, local
Yeah.
AM station, and we would play requests. Callers would call in, say, "Can you play, play the Carpenters or whatever, and dedicate this to." I came in at the very tail end of that time in AM radio, and then and to see it go through all the changes that we've seen now and how music is delivered now. And if there's an AM radio station still broadcasting, it's probably plugged into some sort of talk radio or talk sports
Yeah,
format.
I
It's
don't
kind of
think AM radio has at least been known for playing music in my lifetime. It was always FM, and we even got FM news where I am because we're by New
yeah,
York and Philly.
right, right. Y- Yeah, we had um I remember taking a tour of an AM FM station in the Mohawk Valley of upstate New York when I was in college,
Mhm.
and it was AM news primarily, but they played some music, and they were taking us through these different rooms and everything. And we go into this one room that can't be much bigger than the room you're in right now, and there's just reel to reel um, tape recorders in the whole room. It's been 8 or 10 of them, and
Yeah.
it's that's our FM right now. No,
Nope.
nobody was
I
minding the door, and this is what we're doing. And that's where FM radio was in the mid '70s, and now it's where it is. But again, even that, you mentioned Spotify, you mentioned, we talk about Sirius and all. There's so many ways to deliver that
Yeah.
now. It's amazing, and Lauren has been there through the whole. It's like he's the one constant throughout all of this.
Man is in his 80s.
Incredible,
Yes.
incredible run. Even wrote for Perry Como, which you think about, that's
Yeah.
quite a career.
You were stretching
Fascinating.
really far back now. Um, and we mentioned it, but we haven't discussed this part of the book. The device where they used, I think it was, yes, the book was Jonah Hill's Week. And for
Right.
some reason, they kept bringing up this mid-90s sketch, but that's a lot of like the process of the show. Like, what did you think about, like, here is how we go through the week? Just the weeks part, not when we're talking about how it interplays with going like Lauren's life or past our night live.
Well, again, that's why I liked that device,
Right.
because I got to see. I like to see how it's made, how the sausage is kind of brought together.
I do too. I think that felt like a different book for me. Not that I
And
didn't like it being there, it's just maybe, like, one half being him, one half being this particular week.
I found it a refreshing change from the I think it was Tom Shales did the one of the first Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
It was even a it's more of a study. It was an oral biography. Everybody's talking about, oh yeah, that was a funny bit, or I
Yes.
wrote this and whatever. But I think as a way of telling the story, it helps me to see kind of what goes into it and to appreciate the volume of work that
Yes.
has into it. And a great book written by Phil Rosenthal about how they made Everybody Loves Raymond. And it kind of goes into that same kind of stuff. Here's what we did at the beginning of the week, and here's where we block it, and here's how we,
Do you
put it
know
on.
what the book is called? 'Cause I remember that there was, Exporting Raymond, which was the movie about him going to Russia, and they realized that the comedy doesn't work in Russia.
Right. It's not that.
It's not.
Um,
Okay, it
no,
is definitely a book.
this is a book. Yeah, and I can't think of the name right now. I will find it after this and send you a note on it. But um, it was. But what and I brought that up because I liked
Right.
his. He had a great way of working with his writers, Phil and Ray to a certain extent as well, because Ray had a lot to do with how the story.
Yes.
But he would say, like, at the end of each season, he wanted every writer on the team, and probably 6 or 8 of them, to submit. I may have this not quite accurate, so forgive me because I'm
Okay.
bringing, but to submit a script for the following season. So they would go on vacation. They'd go on their hiatus break they'd already have 5 or 6 scripts that could be done. They weren't finished, and they weren't,
Right.
but he said it really took a tremendous amount of pressure off, because they said his experience was, once you get into producing that show on any sitcom on a weekly basis, you were suddenly in, well, what are we doing next week? You were always thinking about, well, what are we going to do after the one that's coming up? And here he could go into the season with 5 or 6 shows that he knew
Yeah.
were ready to be produced next week if they
Are you
needed to be.
hitting your microphone? Because I kept hearing something.
I got my foot was on the cord, so I was probably kicking my cord.
Okay.
It should be better now. Sorry about that.
No, it's
Um,
okay. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I think it's just interesting how they could pull that all together, and some of the devices that they were able, and in that particular show, how practically every script, and I heard Doris Roberts say this once as well,
Mhm.
and was practically every script was based on something that actually happened to one of the writers, or somebody.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I went to the store and they, carded me or whatever, and okay, we build a show around that. And so it's a great book about producing a television show, and you don't see many of that. I know the Jim Burrows autobiography came out a year or two ago. That kind of touched on that from the perspective of directing, and how
Right.
with an ensemble cast, and how you bring out the best. And then, as a result of explaining that, you can understand why he would stay with Cheers all those years, and why he would, stay
Mhm.
with, some of the other shows that he's done. And you get an appreciation for that process of pulling it all together. I know on one of the um, director commentary tracks on it, Everybody Loves Raymond, Ray Romano talks about, when they're showing the closing credits, or maybe it's in the opening credits as well, where it says based
Yeah.
on, like, Ray Romano. And he said, that was a big deal when the show started. It was, oh, it's going to be based on Ray Romano. So
Right.
that lasted about 3 or 4 weeks, and he was like, I was out of stuff. So
Right,
everybody,
Roseanne has that also at the
right, right.
beginning, and it's like, okay, but you have a writing team of 10 people.
and he was in effect paying tribute to the writers because they're
Yeah.
the ones who, they were really basing the comedy on their experiences and so
Right, and we all have those experiences, and the book I think you're talking about, which I haven't read yet, but I do have it on my bookshelf, is You're Lucky You're Funny by Phil Rosenthal, How Life Becomes a Sitcom.
yes, yes. And then the title comes from oh gee, I kind of forget the incident in there, but it's explained
I wanna
how
say
that
it was Rob Burnett or someone and just straight up insulted Phil.
something like that. Yeah, yeah. I it's I have to uh go back and read it. I hope I still have that around here somewhere, but no, I guess I have an affection for books that explain how TV shows are made, and
Yeah, I do too.
it's because you pull this together. It's in my background. Of course, I've got The Honeymooners back there as one of my favorite all-time shows, the original 39 anyway. And
Yes.
and to think how, just you look at them now and just how simple the scripts were, and it was just an idea. Ralph wants to have a better life, and Ed Norton works in the sewer, and
Yeah,
uh, how Alice could live in that dump of an apartment all day long is beyond anybody's belief, but it was just that was the idea, and that they were able to carry that through.
yeah,
And then you read later on how that part of the Jackie Gleason, it was half of the Jackie Gleason show at the time, and that half was relatively well received and good ratings. Like variety show without Jackie Gleason, and it
yeah,
just that's what really caved. So the decision to for 39 episodes was more about just it wasn't delivering the ratings, and it was that he wanted to just quit while he was ahead. And
yes.
we digress from the topic at hand, which brings us back to Lauren.
Yes.
Can you imagine producing a episode with Jackie Gleason as a guest host? Of course, whenever they used an icon from television, it never quite carried. There's
I
a
know
that
Milton Berle was not a great choice.
no,
There
but
were a few
yeah,
others, but Milton Berle's the one that stands out because he was notoriously bad and should have been one that, while not of the time that Saturday Night Live is, should have been able to handle it.
yes, yes. I think we've learned some of these stars from our history in television. The best ones understood that you can't you got to listen to the producer. You got in a movie you got to listen to the director. You can't have and I think Jerry Lewis hosted one of the episodes during I'm not sure if Lauren was back yet or not. I think it may have been during that.
Wasn't he banned from the show or like something
He hosted one week, but I don't know if I
after
don't
hosting?
he may have been difficult, but I remember they did a sketch
Yeah.
about heart attack. He had heart bypass surgery or
Okay.
something, and
Yes.
he's in the he's he's in the surgery, and and I kind of forget all. I think the doctors are trying to do Jerry Lewis impressions or something. It was kind of crazy, but just bringing an icon in to show, just you have to have that stand back, and this is their show. This is their show.
Yes.
And it's kind of what Carson said about David Letterman hosting the Oscars. He said you have to remember it's their show. You're the host, but
Right.
he was basically saying you're trying to bring late night to the Oscars, and it doesn't work that way. It's their show. You have to kind of do it.
Yeah.
There's certain criteria there, but so
And
we're
anything
go ahead. I was going to ask you, where do you think this picture was? This like from the 30th anniversary show? I'm trying to, because Norm McDonald's in there, and that's why I was just curious. Like, and there's Jim Carrey,
I
and
think it said somewhere. It is from one of the anniversary shows. It might have been 45th anniversary.
yeah, could be. And I found it interesting too is that you see Tina Fey here on the back of the book, but you don't see any any women on that in that cover photo, other than Tina Fey, and she's over here now.
Yeah, I
Maybe
thought
that,
that was very interesting. Also, the only person of color you can really make out is um Chris Rock.
rock right there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's in many ways kind of a commentary on some of the aspects of the show that may not have been discussed over the years.
Right, and they were discussed a little bit. I'm not sure we are the right people to discuss it.
That's right. I
That's why I
agree.
didn't steer the conversation that way, but it is definitely a conversation that should be had with SNL does not have the greatest track record with diversity.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to say before I close out?
No, again, I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about it. I think that we will long remember the influence of Lauren from his 50 years with that particular show, and we will also know, um, he really elevated the importance of a strong producer
Yes.
carrying out a show, because you hear lots of stories about how stars kind of were given all kinds of green lights to do things, and just it never really was as successful as it could be. And I tell you, having sat in a producer's chair for a number of years in a different line of work, it's a lot about saying no, and a lot about saying
Mhm.
no. And you may not like this decision, but this is the decision that we're going to have to live with. And he was able to do that. And I think a lot of us that had roles like that in broadcasting can appreciate that. And we probably won't see anybody with that kind of clout and that kind of respect cross our paths again in network television, because as we talked about, it's changed so much since the
Right.
time, and some of the stuff is just legacy that will probably go away when he goes away.
Right, we do have some producers and showrunners who have their own empires, but it's nothing like Saturday Night Live. It's like Shondaland, which is a lot of dramas. We have whatever Ryan Murphy decides he's working on. I have yet to find like an overarching theme with his work,
Hmm.
but he's had at least 6 shows.
Probably, yeah, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So we do have some people who are still powerhouses, just not in a Lorne Michaels way or in a way that late night in the past has been. And Steve, before we go, do you have your book on you? Because we always want to give a shout out.
Thank you
So
very much.
you're
Yes,
welcome.
it's still doing very well in terms of the folks that I talk to who have read it or are interested in it. Um, Jack and Johnny is about the 20-year friendship between the two comedians, and it's opened up a lot of doors. We're considering doing uh, kind of a second book that focuses on other show business friendships. I don't think there's another book in just one more friendship like Jack and Johnny. There was a couple that I was looking at, and it just didn't seem to have that same kind of longevity. But there's certainly a lot of of friendships that we might be able to combine for something broader. But I've been very gratified with the reception that that book is getting, and I'm really looking forward to Mark Melkoff's book. He is
Yes.
about about his affection for Johnny, and he
Yes.
happens to have that 8 to 10 years worth of wonderful interviews
The
that he did on.
Carson podcast.
Yes, I told Mark. Mark was one of the people I interviewed for my book, but I told him at the time I went back to episode 1, and I just listen to one every week now just because they're there. The archive is still available, and it's just great to go back and listen again to some of these episodes. And I just do it on a weekly basis. And okay, find the one I listened to last week, go to the next one, and I'm looking forward to his book when it comes out.
Right. It's been the year of Johnny Carson for some reason because my friend Johnny also just came out.
Yes, I did see that online. I haven't read it yet. Have you read it?
I have not. It just came this week. I am
Okay.
planning. I know Rob Cates, who we both know, mentioned that there's like 60 pages of the book about Johnny, and then a lot of it is just about Howard Smith, who wrote the book, his life with these celebrities.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we shall see, but he does on the back list Bruce Springsteen, Princess Diana, Gretzky, Arnold Palmer, Clint Eastwood, Tommy Lasorda, Jimmy Hoffa. Okay. Okay.
How's old Jimmy doing?
Yeah, how is he these days?
Well, it's a great idea for a book, about his friendship, and of course we just learned that one of Johnny's sons passed. So
Yes.
it's yeah, you're right. This seems to be just a lot of attention on Johnny this year, and so that's great. So I always say, um, if you buy only one book about Johnny Carson this year, buy mine too. So so
Yes.
it's always great to talk to you, and I thank you for inviting me, and I
Thank you.
hope we explored this a while anyway.
Yes, we
You're
did.
welcome.
And yeah, thank you. And until next time, this is Allison Lips for Greetings from the Idiot Box. Remember, television is a medium, neither rare nor well done. Bye.